Okay, I bet you thought we were done with the Han Dynasty. We're not done with the Han Dynasty. They may have not been the biggest dynasty, our longest running, only 400 years, but they're a very important dynasty. Hint, hint, if you haven't picked who you're doing for your infomercial. So the end of the Qin dynasty. The Chinese people were unhappy with the legalist government of Qin. I have a source who is Chinese, and yeah, there was partying when they got rid of the Qin dynasty. They really did not like the Qin dynasty. So after Qin Shi Huangdi's death in 210 BC, the people rebelled against their Qin rulers. And Liu Bang, a rebel, gained control of the Han kingdom. Yes, you need to know Liu Bang. He decided the Qin dynasty had lost the mandate of heaven, and he conquered his enemies and established his own empire. The difference is the people liked Liu Bang a whole lot more than they liked Qin Huang and his descendants. So, how did the Han did things? They believed the emperor should not rule their people with force. See why he was better liked? So they began to incorporate Confucian ideas of moral behavior in the government. So the Qin dynasty tried to get rid of Confucianism. You may recall they actually killed the Confucius scholars. Well, you can't so easily kill a religion, whether they actually believe in a god or it's just anything to do with morals. You can't, to quote V in V for Vendetta, you cannot kill an idea. So the Confucius were still around, and Liu Bang liked Confucianism. So he said, you know what? Confucian ideas are actually great, and we're going to incorporate them into our government. So this did lead to a golden age because it's not a theocracy. The religion is not controlling the government's just trying to incorporate morals into its dealings. But under the Han Dynasty, this is a golden age, a long period of stability and wealth, and it enabled the empire to expand all the way into what is now Korea and what is Vietnam. And they established trade in the West, which is why we're going back over them again and why one of the reasons they're so important. Hint, hint, the Silk Road. So they did have a lot of warfare. Military tactics and new weapons helped to expand their empire. And because of trade, they're going to learn about the Iron Age. Better weapons. Better weapons means we more easily kill our enemies. So they had a well-organized army. All men from ages 25 to 60 had to serve at least 2 years in the army. This is why it is believed that Mulan, at least, the 1988 version and most, would have lived in the Northern Kingdom during the Han Dynasty. So it's just 2 years. So no, they couldn't just call her father back up to serve, but they could require the family provide somebody. And this increased their army from 130,000 to 300,000, anywhere between then at all times. So they had a good standing army. And by that way, there are still countries who have that practice. Israel comes to mind immediately. If you're a Wonder Woman fan, that's why Gal Gadot has military experience, because they require both men and women to serve. Switzerland also does the same. So warfare continued. Technology. They did create new armor designed like fish scales, which is going to give you more, well, it's easier to get through chainmail than it is scaled armor. So this is the armor you tend to see more in classic Chinese movies. And it did help with the movement because of the fish scales. It's actually easier to move in those than it would be in what is going to develop still in the Middle Ages in Europe. Iron swords, once again, as I mentioned, the iron finally got over there. So the Iron Age, once again, starts with the Hittites in the Middle East. And finally, it got over to China. It had expanded into Europe much more quickly. And these are longer than before, and it also used the ironing to make crossbows. Crossbows are wooden, but they have metal components. Even kites were used to scare enemy soldiers by using bamboo to make ghostly noises. Ooh, ooh. Anyway, psychological warfare. Government did have a strong central government of the Qin, so they kept that idea. But they were not legalism. Legalism is more like Hobbes, the belief that people are born evil. Confucianism believes people are born good. So this is the whole Hobbes and Locke thing. Well, Locke finally got control, as he does in, the big influence in the United States formation. So they softened the harsh ruling style and brought Confucius ideas back to the government. They also had changed the way, they created a bureaucracy. It's a form of government that is structured like a pyramid with a few people at top and then many at the bottom. So they brought in a whole lot more people. They also brought in a merit-based system instead of just, hiring your family and friends. So the emperor used this to help run the empire using this form of bureaucracy. Top officials lived at the capital and gave advice to the emperor. So those were the advisors you see. You'll see these also in Mulan with, what's his name, whose name actually translates into Bully. And lower level officials lived throughout the empire and oversaw roads and canals. So these are going to be more your governor, on-site people. Grain production, your mayors, and storage and other important duties. So you had the big guys up at the top in the capital, but you still had people overseeing your duties. But it's not a feudal system. They are actually aiding the people and not, people paying taxes directly to them. One key improvement is, of course, the civil servants, as I mentioned, and how they were hired. It used to be based on the social class. The nobles and the royals would be given the jobs. Now they had to take a test. It's merit-based. They were chosen on their ability and knowledge, so they would be given an actual test and placed depending on how they did on the test. To become officials, young men had to pass a long and difficult test. Unfortunately, they did not allow women into the government. As I've mentioned, Confucianism, at this time at least, did not give women as much power as they'd had before. And based on the 5 classic writings, so once again, Confucianism, so you had to, there's one of their little faults. So it's merit-based, but it is semi-religious based as well. You have to have studied Confucianism and know Confucianism to get the job. And of course, students had to have learned this by heart anyway, because like in the early United States, the religion owned the college. So you would have had to learn it anyway. And once a civil servant was hired, they're not allowed to serve in their own home district. This was thought to, they take advantage of the government, try to get more power for their own people. And they intended, of course, they also didn't want them to give special favors to family and friends. So they're trying to prevent nepotism. So they're afraid, the mayor's going to give his buddies the contracts, give his family a little bit extra food and money. And they did not want that. And each of them are evaluated every 3 years and could either be promoted, going, oh, you're great, we want you more in the capital, advising the emperor because we like the way you think, or demoted, going, you're an idiot. We don't think you need to be over these people. You need somebody to look over you and, reread the instructions here, idiot. So either way could happen. At least they still kept their jobs. Might be a different job. They still had a job, though. So their agriculture. This is another big thing that changes. So farmers are expected to grow enough food to feed their own families and to help stock the shared granaries. So under the Han Dynasty, we have a food storage system going, which you'll remember the Egyptians did as well. This is one of the reasons the Egyptians' lives were happier than the Mesopotamians. So also expected to make their own clothing, self-reliance, build their homes, and give 1 month of unpaid labor to the government for building projects, canals, roads, etc. Yeah, free labor. So the chain pump is something else they invented. It's an invention that moved water from low irrigation ditches, canals, up to the fields. So you can now farm more land, and you can start farming higher up in the mountains. Workers used pedals to turn the wheels, which would pull a series of wooden planks, which in turn moved the water uphill to the fields. So this is, by the way, what a modern chain pump looks like. As I mentioned, the old ones, you had to turn the wheel, with your foot. It was more manual. They also poured iron into molds, because once they got the iron, they really started having a blast with it, which actually allowed mass production of goods, especially iron plows. Pushing dirt away from the spot makes it easier to plant, and they invented the wheelbarrow as well as the spoked wheel, which allowed them to invent the wheelbarrow. So it's the molds they created. It's just something a lot of the Europeans hadn't thought of. So once they do get iron, they actually start pushing ahead of what a lot of the Middle Eastern and Europeans are doing because of these mold techniques. And the two most important industries, once again in China, are silk and salt. And believe me, once the Silk Road gets established, this is something the Romans really want. As a matter of fact, the word salt, they paid the salt in Rome to their soldiers. And the word salary comes from salt. So the government is controlling these, both the silk and the salt. Yeah. And both industries would lead to new inventions. Might have gotten even more if the government wasn't controlling them. Anyway, so silk. This is a silkworm, by the way. Isn't it pretty? So material made from the fibers of a silkworm cocoon is how silk is made. So the silkworms make this cocoon. When they burst out, they take the silk, the cocoon, and it's difficult and time-consuming to make, and thus it is very, very valuable. Besides, it's a nice soft material, so it's a difference. Silk is better than satin and easier to sew, but is it necessarily the best fabric? It's the most expensive because it's still difficult to make. And it's developed, so they developed a foot-powdered machine that wound the fibers onto a large reel ready to use. So they had a foot-powered spinner, what do we call that? Spinning wheel, that would then make the fibers and wind them up together. So then you can take them to the loom and you make your actual cloth. And it made production more efficient so you can make more to trade. And they, by the way, closely guarded the secret behind the silk, both how to make that it came from the silkworms, and how to make these fibers. Very close kept secrets. Now the salt, of course, is used to preserve meat and vegetables. This is going to allow you to increase your population because you can slaughter your animals in the fall. You use salt to preserve them, and they'll last you throughout the winter until, they start having more babies and you can slaughter again. So at first, the only way to get it was from the sea. But the Huns discovered a way to mine it. This is before, I guess, they found some of the salt flats. There's some in Africa, and of course some in the Americas, but they didn't know about those. So salt water or brine exists beneath the surface of the earth. So they began digging deep wells using an iron, really, once they got that iron, they went to town, baby, tipped bamboo drills. So this is the first known early drill. And when they reached the brine, which is sometimes a good 1,000 feet below the surface, they would take a hollow bamboo pole and drop it down. So now the pole, of course, bamboo is hollow in the middle. So it has a valve that would allow the water in, and when the pole was full, they found a way to get the valve to shut, and they pulled it up. The water was then placed in iron pots and were heated until the water evaporates and it leaves the salt. And then they traded it along this Silk Road, which is going to be named after the silk, but believe me, spices are very important too. The next part of the video lecture, we will start talking about art in the Han Dynasty.